and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilbourn, and the Dadley Boyz of What Culture, Michael Hamflett and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-views, we have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week complete with a bloody quiz, of course, on wrestle culture. But gents, we are gathered here today because I've decided it's time for you two to get positive. So we are going to discuss what is WWE getting right. Michael Sidgwick, the floor is yours.
I'm going to be earnest here. I'm going to be trying to be earnest and objective because in spite of my default cynicism, improvements have been made since the reintroduction of Paul Heyman to creative. I can't deny that. I won't deny that. I don't want to deny that. In fact, the main change for me is just how much more watchable Raw is. I don't think it's necessarily great. Mostly it's good, patchy, but just the opening segments. The opening segments are so much better. I love the idea of Samoa Joe just disrupting the show a couple of weeks back and just cutting that promo. I'm not following his script because in his mind there isn't a script, which then fed the idea that in my mind there wasn't a script, helping the suspension of disbelief element. That was really good. I liked a match starting Raw this Monday. I liked Seth Rollins just pieing Elias with a chair. Again, no, you want to follow a script, but a lot of the wrestlers are now being scripted, ironically, to go, no, not anymore. We're not doing this anymore. It feels more like a lively, vital, slightly more believable product.
I think SmackDown, has been producing fairly consistently despite all the issues that we've been through over the last, 6-12 months, I suppose. It's on off.
18 years?
Yes. But yeah.
That's it. I'm going to be...
that was your one.
That was my one per list.
You're completely right, though, in terms of the fact that we initially were sort of shocked when we would review Raw and SmackDown and say, hey, I think Raw's better this week. But now it's become just consistently a lot less of a 3-hour slog.
I think Sidgwick's right to point out the differences, not so much in the wrestlers, not just the wrestlers getting pushed or the quality of the matches or those things that you might look at as sort of isolated things. It's the rhythm of Monday Night Raw in general. It feels like a more watchable show over 3 hours. 3 hours is such a long time for a TV show. I think this is the best run of episodes that haven't been dreadful, probably in the history of it being 3 hours long, because if nothing else, that time saps your energy. The end segments can sometimes be incredible, but you're drained by then. Sometimes it starts hot and then you're just bored to death by the second hour and you haven't got the patience for the third. From virtually, I'd say, week one of the period we believe Paul Heyman to have had control, he's made little changes that have made the show feel so much more dynamic. I'll recall the Bobby Lashley-Braun Strowman brawl going on early, and then half of the set hanging off for the remainder of the show, and then that being a talking point that kept being revisited, and it just immediately, everything felt a little bit more dynamic and a bit vital, when normally nothing feels important. Everything felt like it didn't really matter, and I think that's been the biggest change. It doesn't feel like one sort of storyline's better than some of the stuff that was maybe happening around WrestleMania season, for example, but the show itself feels like you probably should be there for it. It's trying to become a destination again.
Yeah, is it fair to say that the more stuff they've sort of taken away, the more important the basics have felt? Because they tried throwing so many different things at it. The wildcard rule is the perfect example of that. And yet you take that away and you just say, oh, yeah, well, occasionally some SmackDown stars will show up, but it's not through this, checklist of, do they count us as tag team count as two people?
I'm trying to be nice, but they did actually mention the wildcard rule.
Did they?
Monday. Yeah, but just to get back on track,
as well. For the first
just
time
to get back on track, they got rid of the 2 out of 3 falls matches.
Yes, that was
Thank
dreadful.
God for that.
It was an attempt at making something, mean something in terms of they don't want to put wrestling on during the breaks, but I don't think they only ever alienated fans and ruined that match stipulation.
Low-key weirdest thing of the year on WWE TV for me, that, because I don't think, already it's been a month maybe since they stopped doing it, and already it's one of the things you can easily forget and just move on. But living through it for all of those 3 or 4 weeks was so bizarre. Every match, every wrestling match you've ever seen was suddenly being tossed aside for a new format. They were trying to reinvent the wheel, weren't they? Effectively, it was like, right, here's one fall in 2 minutes before a break because we're going to have a 10-minute one next. Or all the different ways they had to come up with. Oh, it looks like we're going to get into a tag team match. Raw was still rolling on. It was just with these convoluted stipulations instead of suicide dives. It was so strange.
We're trying to be nice.
and now things are better.
Yes. Yeah. So do you think this is the impact of Bischoff and Heyman, or do you think it's
Bischoff's done now? Sorry, I'm trying to be nice. Bischoff's done absolutely nothing. No, I think a lot of this clearly is Paul Heyman because he's always kept his ear to the ground of what fans want. He was a big proponent of pushing CM Punk because he knew the buzz with which he arrived in 2006. So he knows. He was pointing out AJ Styles as one of the greatest of all time a couple of years ago. Like, he knows what we want, and I think he can't just storm into Vince's office and say, oh, by the way, everyone thinks that scripted promos are lame and bollocks. He can't do that, so I think he's insidiously trying to change.
Well, he tried it the first time and got it wrong, didn't he? That was his crack.
So he's trying to insidiously change it from the inside, so I do attribute this to Paul Heyman.
One thing you pointed out, which probably is the Heyman impact, is the sense of sort of distracting Vince McMahon to allow you to put on quality wrestling matches. Explain that.
Well, it's got to be that. It was just a theory from what's considered probably the best period in SmackDown's history. 2002, 2003 had the SmackDown 6, and that was like transformative pro wrestling for WWE, emerging from the embers of the Attitude Era. But that show also featured the Billy and Chuck 3-minute warning wedding angle, Al Wilson and Dawn Marie. Al Wilson getting shagged to death by Dawn Marie, literally. Like either side of, say, Edge and Eddie Guerrero are having like an incredible ladder match, for example. The No Mercy pay-per-view features Benoit and Angle versus Edge and Rey Mysterio, one of the greatest WWE matches of all time. And it features a company that at the time was running the Katie Vick storyline on Raw. And you have an Undertaker having to back accusations that he was having an affair with somebody because Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman were trying to get into his head. There was this stupid soap stuff, and it was almost there, like I say, as a 20-foot distraction because Vince McMahon loves that stuff to just sneak on great wrestling because it was like, well, go on and do what you want with those guys, you know? And it just, that was a pattern of Paul Heyman's tenure over that, what's a beloved period of SmackDown that really exists today. People are loyal to SmackDown.
It's an actual thing, this, you know. An actual thing. South Park, the creators, when they were discussing once the movie that they did, Bigger, Longer, Uncut, or whatever it was called, I think that's what it was called, they said that they intentionally, in the original draft of the script, put in the most awful, reprehensible material, knowing full well that it would immediately catch the eye of the censors, and they go, well, you can't have those 3 jokes in it, they're horrible, and then relatively the actual horrific stuff they got in the script was just considered, all right, okay, well, that's bad, but it's not as bad as that stuff. So they worked the script supervisor and the studios. So it's an actual thing that writers do.
Like when they hire someone to stand next to Meg in Family Guy to make her look less ugly.
Yeah, no, it's an actual tactic that writers do to try and sneak what they really want, but the thing is near enough the knuckle past editors. And I generally think Paul Heyman is smart enough to do this as well.
See, I'm low.
So he's cooking Mike Kanellis. Get a load of this. Cook, Vince. What's a cook? I haven't been on the internet at all. Oh, well, it's this. Oh, well, it's obviously such good. Right, okay, we're just going to cook him. Right, Ricochet. Come on, do some things.
You've got 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, like that.
So no, I think Paul Heyman is pleasing a lot of masters quite well at this point, and Raw has benefited from it.
That's the thing for me, you know. I'm loath to just say that, like, kind of like sweeping generalisation. Now Paul Heyman's here, he saved Raw. Because when we were critical of Raw, we were critical of the system. It wasn't particularly anyone. Yeah. It's always one man. It's Vince McMahon. It's his system. But systemic problems that were ruining this show. And you can't just then say, well, Paul Heyman's done away with this system. What he's done is obviously found a way to work within it. And that's the trick. And that's maybe something that Eric Bischoff, who admitted he had nothing to do with wrestling for all these years, might take a little bit longer to do, or maybe just won't do at all. That's what we saw with Bruce Pritchard on week 1 and then never again since his return to the company. So what Heyman's doing so far, which is so clever, is finding a way to fit within that system, to sit at Gorilla with Vince every week and not alienate him, not annoy him, and sneak his ideas through. And long may that continue, because as we know with him, it won't. So we're in an era now, we're in a period, and we should probably just enjoy it while we can.
We don't want to talk about management for the whole time. We should talk about some of the characters that have been doing fantastic stuff. And the most obvious one that leaps out is, of course, the Fiend, Bray Wyatt. Arguably the shining light in the company right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I will always credit somebody else for a take, except in this example, I've forgotten the guy's name. But on Reddit, someone said, no, it might have been, or a YouTube comment, whatever. Someone said, as the Firefly Funhouse vignettes and all their demented, just outrageous creativity were stealing Raw every single week, just said, it's basically Bray Wyatt versus AEW at this point. And that's how powerful he is. It's not just how great and creative and complex and terrifying this new character is, but it's just what it represents, and that's hope.
I think the longer it goes on, in this pattern of not being used and abused every week, and we've not had anything even teasing a second match yet. I think we were talking over the desk yesterday over the Jerry Lawler attack. It struck me that after the Finn Balor match, they've not hit the panic button and tried to set away his next feud. Why, logically, would any wrestler want anything to do with this guy at the moment? So why would anybody challenge him? He's going to have to come for somebody and tease them into having a match. And I would say you keep it and match again like SummerSlam off television. You wait for another pay-per-view. You wait for a big stage, a big occasion for it. And it seems like they're going to be patient with it because, and again, this feels like that you're playing both sides. You're playing the audience, but you're playing Vince. They're still merchandising it. They're still treating it in every other way like a Raw character that features in 8 segments across the show. You can buy the mask. You can buy the puppets, on WWEshop.com. But on TV...
The loot boxes or whatever they were saying,
if that's
sold
all,
out immediately.
If that's all you're focusing on, you're getting, 3 minutes every fortnight? And that's fantastic, isn't it? Because that's all you want, and you're still thirsty for more.
The discipline in itself is, commendable. Really
I think the biggest concern we all had was we all knew the Firefly Funhouse segments were all sort of shot separately. I think there's 8 of them, something around that.
Yeah.
That they were all shot, and then we were like, right, okay, what's next? Because we're sort of entrusting this thing that has, organically built itself, and now, okay, how do you get him on TV? How on earth do you get him wrestling on a pay-per-view? And credit, should be given to WWE for handling that so well, because we were all absolutely terrified to see how he was going to interact with Finn Balor at SummerSlam.
It's all departments of the company working in complete improbable harmony. Like the writing team is not far too eager to get the one hot thing across every area of TV. Like remember Becky Lynch had a WrestleMania when she was discussing everything backstage with various people because it was just get Becky in every segment. None of that has happened at all. The writing has been really good. Bray Wyatt's performance is just uncanny in how has he managed to get a supernatural gimmick, a dead gimmick, over to an extent that's actually scary. He's done really, really amazingly well. And just the presentation and the direction of the character, it's not just some useless jump scare from a modern studio horror. Like, even the way the lights go out creates that unnerving sense of dread, like one by one, creating that lurching feeling of, oh, he's coming. Just every minor detail. It's like so intricately done. I'm really impressed by it all.
The way they directed his entrance at SummerSlam, so you knew he was just a man walking down an aisle. And if you watch someone's phone video of that, that'll really dispel so much of WWE's hard work, because you would never know that. You could never really work out where you were never allowed to settle. And I find that it's why I think there's extra enjoyment following SummerSlam is you make a great point. Like, for all the Firefly Funhouses airing, it felt like the gimmick was just skating on thin ice, and we were all more enjoying it with the dread of waiting for the ice to crack. And SummerSlam felt like such a success that you can worry less about that now. You allow yourself to put a bit of faith, and because this is the positive podcast, let's have the faith in the company to stick with this, because they've earned that little bit of trust with the first outing for this character and then the subsequent one appearance with Jerry Lawler. And I think that's the really satisfying bit. When you know that the company, you've got good faith in the character, you can have a bit of good faith in the company.
And credit needs to be given as well to Bray Wyatt, the character, in terms of the fact that you have that dichotomy between the two of, we're obviously terrified of the Fiend and we see what he can do in between the ropes, but you need that sort of Mr. Rogers character who you just have a look in his eyes and he's got that, you can see the darkness behind his eyes, but he's trying to be this positive,
We've only seen it once, but when he set up the match as Mr. Rogers, Mr. Wyatt with Finn Balor, he put Finn Balor over.
Yeah.
But he's allowed to in that guise, so it's classic pro wrestling almost.
And hopefully he just lives on the screen forever. There's no urgency to see him ever live, really, is
No.
now. That has to exist almost as like a figment of the Fiend's imagination, or however they decide to spin it. They can never bring that to a live arena. And I don't think they will. They've shown such discipline, as you say, that I sense there's only good things still to come for this character.
And we should mention someone who we have been anticipating the return of since WrestleMania, who has come back arguably at the perfect time, immediately post SummerSlam, and launched herself into this feud with Becky Lynch. I'm talking, of course, of Sasha Banks. And it's not just that, it's the fact you've got Sasha Banks versus Becky Lynch, and you've got Bayley versus Charlotte. Before we get to the 4 horsewomen side of things, Sasha Banks' return.
Magnificent comeback. Just a good, solid pro wrestling comeback. That was the one for me where I could really feel Paul Heyman's influence quite directly on an element of the product, only because he's such a wrestling guy, and as we know from the WWE writers' videos, a lot of them aren't. And it just felt like, so the blue hair thing, which they obviously touched on in the promo this week, that was a very striking visual there. It was all a bit literal, and it was a bit on the nose. Oh, here are true colours. But that's all right, because wrestling can paint in big, broad strokes sometimes. The attack was vicious because Sasha Banks is a great pro wrestler. The boss character is something she honed and crafted in a developmental brand for something she was never able to use on the main roster. And yet here we are. Her facials, her timing, the execution of everything she was doing was fantastic. Becky Lynch, you could tell, and Natalya actually, they were both clearly very giving. You know, there was obviously that instruction of lay it in, make it look good because this has got to count, you know. And I just feel like the execution of that could have so easily been botched. We've seen comebacks go wrong on night one. Or I think back to Seth Rollins' huge return as a babyface, and then they just want him to be a heel. So the next night he comes out on Raw and he says, yeah, well, screw the fans. I think that was 2016 or something. That could have easily been Sasha Banks. We could have been week 1, week 2, and we're thinking, oh, the air's out of that balloon straight away. And yet she's come straight for the title. She's come with a purpose. Again, the character, the reason she's been off can be, from her side of things, explained away as being time she needed to reflect. From Becky Lynch's point of view, she is positioned as a bit of a crybaby. There's a realistic, justifiable reason for all of the things the characters are doing, and the match theoretically should deliver because these two have got fabulous previous.
They had a fantastic match at an early takeover.
Career changing for both of them.
Fabulous.
Yep.
She's reinvigorated Becky Lynch's title reign with this as well, hasn't she?
Oh, yeah, without doubt.
Instantly,
Without doubt.
instantly. She has to win, I think, as well.
My only concern, and I don't like the cheap heat element of this whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't like it, but again, she's so confident. She's back, basically.
Yeah.
She's back. So I really enjoy that. My only concern is that they're accelerating towards 2 horsewomen rivalries now without building much in the background, but that's something that we'll wreck on this podcast in 2 months, so I don't have to be worried about it now.
Yeah, the other side of things, the Bailey Charlotte thing we saw on SmackDown the other day, is really exciting too because it's what both women need.
Yeah, I think Bailey's been quite uniquely handled since winning the title. The feuds haven't been super focused upon, but I don't think therefore she's been exposed. She's still not a fantastic talker, but all they've tried to do is just give a character a little bit of agency, and pushing Charlotte off a chair would otherwise be a heel thing, but you still... I personally, you watch it and you're still kind of waiting for her to stand up to people like Charlotte. If she's standing up to Alexa Bliss, like, who cares anymore? Because she's done away with that. Charlotte's the next one. There's an element of, like, obviously the comparison is going to be made between her and Sasha Banks because they were partners, but having those 2 matches on the same night, it allows for the tag matches in the build-up, and it allows for the first-time interaction of all 4 of them at the same time. And this could be the first case where I'm in favour of the Under Siege Survivor Series theme, because Sasha as Raw champion versus Bailey as SmackDown champion with no belts on the line as an exhibition that turns nasty has the potential to be the match of the night. And there's just, I don't know, there feels like there's, all along, the 4 horsewomen were supposed to be the driving force of the women's division. And it's okay to be distracted with Carmella's and Alexa Bliss. But now this is actually happening, you realise why. It's because they're the ones that offer you so much promise. The matches can potentially deliver on good promos. You can't have good weeks with Alexa Bliss and Nia Jax if the matches are going to let you down, but you're allowed to believe that these are going to deliver on the night, and I think it really enhances the promos on the way.
Do you know one thing I particularly have liked, especially very, very recently, is the fact that WWE have made us not miss the likes of Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey for a long while, especially in that Seth Rollins early Universal Championship reign post-WrestleMania. It felt like this void was there, this Brock Lesnar shadow was hanging over everything. And whilst the build to SummerSlam I thought was dreadful, the subsequent conclusion and where they've gone from there with this intriguing, at least, potential showdown between Braun Strowman and Seth Rollins, you're not saying, I kind of miss Brock Lesnar in and around this. You've made the other talent, and that same applies, like you mentioned there, for these women's feuds. For you're not missing people who won't be there.
They stopped dicking about with like evidently unpopular experiments that they always do after WrestleMania. This year, it was Baron Corbin and Lacey Evans, just office favourites that no one really connected with in the audience, but it's post-WrestleMania, there's a natural lull, so let's just try and get our stuff in. That's been dispensed with, thank God. You could send Lacey Evans back to developmental, but doesn't exist anymore, so I don't know what happens with her, but regardless, they're putting people together who are in the same orbit, in the same league, and that makes for more compelling television.
They've been doing some great stuff with Kevin Owens recently, but I want to talk more about, you mentioned both the new talent are being showcased as well in this new regime, newer regime.
Yes. I'm going to specifically talk about Buddy Murphy because I think he's brilliant. He's not brilliant. He's really, really, really good, though. And as much as I despise how cartoonish this Roman Reigns attacker storyline is, at least approaches... This is a compliment they don't deserve. I'm being positive. it approaches almost the Chris Kresge school of storytelling in which, and this is Maverick, there can be more than two people involved in a singles feud. It can branch out, it can splinter off, it can create for matches on television that aren't identical to what you're going to see on pay-per-view in 3 or 4 weeks. Buddy Murphy's been a really good part of a terrible storyline, and I think that the execution's been abysmal. Last night, SmackDown, we're recording this on Wednesday, it was just... This is a positive podcast. Buddy Murphy's wrestled 2 really good TV matches.
Yes. Yeah.
That is the headline for me. It's not the headline for them, but it is for me. And it can only really help him.
With Murphy, I would say it's not just Chris Kresge, it's the Hulk Dust, Austin Dust thing, isn't it? He's near Bryan and Roman. So even we can have our own views on this particular storyline, but being in their orbit for a little bit and having these great matches, people will remember it. People will talk about it. Twitter now is so important, isn't it? The engagement the next day. And after the Roman Reigns match in particular, the engagement in Buddy Murphy's future was absolutely huge. Like, the best kept secret thing wasn't a gimmick, was it? You know, if you weren't watching the kickoff, so you weren't watching 205 Live, you were missing Buddy Murphy, and now here he is. What I like about this is, so subjectively, some of the wrestlers that are getting pushed as part of, say, like Heyman's initiatives on Raw or Murphy on SmackDown, they might not be to my taste, but I like to watch it happen, because ultimately a wrestler can win you over, and that's okay. So I think of the likes of Drew McIntyre last year, wasn't my cup of tea, but gradually that push won me over until they gave it to Dolph Ziggler, but this is the positive podcast. So then the likes of Cedric Alexander and Cesaro are the two that stick out to me. Neither two of my favourites, but they're getting profile on Raw. They feel like refreshed completely by the new regime. We talked about the King of the Ring brackets offering a bit of purpose to that group of wrestlers that are squashed somewhere between world title contenders once a month and 24/7 runarounds. And Bobby Roode got a squash win on Raw the other week. They've done nothing with that yet, but that's not to say that he's not going to be a profiled wrestler again. The idea
narrator.
Yeah.
He's not going to be a profiled wrestler again.
The idea being that it looks as though wrestlers are going to be given 1 or 2 opportunities to show their bosses or show others within the company why they should be featured
Which,
more.
not being facetious, the wildcard rule has kind of... You still get these random switches, temporary weekly switches, but it's not got to the point where it's covering the product like Shane McMahon did. He's not been on Raw in a while, has he?
No.
To my recollection. No. So we're away from those dark days of the late spring to the point where, yes, even though they very rarely follow up on this sort of thing, like Bobby Roode can win a match. Buddy Murphy can feature heavily on SmackDown because there's not like a glutton of Raw stars coming over.
The sort of the profiled group at the moment, I think in the last week they were on both shows because of the wild card, but I think they call themselves FTRKO. The Revival and Randy Orton union has just immediately made the Revival feel important again. They're not really in a feud of their own as such, are they? They're kind of helping Randy Orton out against the New Day, but the point is they're being figured in as important characters. They're being used not to sip wine in Shane McMahon's underground James Bond bunker, but to have wrestling matches, because that's kind of all they've got, and that should be all they've got. They're the wrestlers, and I think there's a few more of those that are breaking through, and long may that continue, because I'm not necessarily suggesting that any one of them are going to be the next big thing, but these undercards and these midcards have got to mean more than they have done over the last 5 or 6 years.
Finally,
because the gulf's been huge.
You mentioned the 24/7 championship there, and whilst, yes, it's been sort of used to entertain a lot of the goobers for WWE, it has been very creative, and they deserve
talking about the fans or the talent?
credit there. All the stuff with Drake Maverick, R-Truth, stuff, going forward, yes, a lot of it is just sort of hot potato in the belt on episodes of TV to kind of spice things up, but in terms of like...
it is a hot potato belt.
Yes, and it's horrendous to look at. But in terms of, the stuff that they've done, it's been very creative and entertaining.
I think what the 24/7 title capitalises on is the fact that WWE for the longest time has been a week-to-week show. If you didn't like an element of the storyline this week, don't worry, because I'll have forgotten about it next week and you can enjoy that one instead. The 24/7 title actually plays on that. So if the banter on Monday and Tuesday this week wasn't your cup of tea, there's every chance it will be next week. Not a big fan of Elias just carrying the title around and taking it into main events. It's all right, a pregnant woman's going to win it next week. Weren't into the pregnant woman, it's okay, there'll be a title defence on a golf cart, and so on and so on and so on. What you didn't like this week will be forgotten next week, but that's okay. That's the one element of the company where there doesn't need to be a lot of like tight narrative, and callbacks are cute, but other than sort of R-Truth piggybacking Carmella, there's not really, and whatever Drake Maverick's up to, trying to get his hull. There's not really a lot of other threads that they need to keep to in the 24. And I think this is one of the few things where this system, this writing team, this fractured, knackered group of writers can actually just flex a bit of creative muscle, and it's nice to watch.
This is a positive podcast, so a joke I never found funny is getting old for me, so I will just comment no further.
There we have it then. Let us know your thoughts on what WWE is getting right in the comment section below or on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. Watch there. You can follow all three of us. You can follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael Hamflett.
Follow Michael Sidgwick at
Sidgwick.
You can follow me at Adam Wilbourn. You follow us all at WhatCultureWWE, as I said. And make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. This has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boyz. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.